Okay.
Good morning.
Good morning. So this is Friedman, and we're going to continue the conversation. We were just talking about the ACP, the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, and a new report that's come out about the inaccuracy of the advertising that's been going on in the eastern part of the state, which promotes the economic growth that this pipeline is going to build and the jobs it's going to create, and anyway, how inaccurate that was. But this morning we're going to be talking about permaculture and about the kudzu. Well, Justin Holt's going to be joining us about 10 o'clock or so. Yeah. And so we're going to be talking about the kudzu culture in western North Carolina. But yesterday, or rather on Friday, we had Robert Idison here, and in fact, we're going to be showing that interview at 11 o'clock after News from the Roots. Robert was talking about water issues and the how water is the center of permaculture design. Would you agree with that assessment? He was saying that back in the early, I guess it was in the 1970s, he met the guy from Australia,
Bill Mollison?
Yeah, Bill Mollison, who came to western North Carolina.
I think it was in 1981.
Maybe so. He came to the Long Branch Environmental Community, and where Paul Gallimore is. And he he impressed on him the message that Bill Mollison was transmitting, or at least Robert picked up on, was that water is the center of a permaculture design. First you figure out where all the water is going to be and how you're going to deal with it, and then you design everything around that.
Yeah, I mean, water, I think of the landscape as a body, and different elements are different parts of that body. And so water is the blood.
Yeah.
But there are also bones, and there's flesh, and there's a nervous system, and all those things have to be considered. But water is what makes a lot of the patterns visible in a landscape, because water tells you where the nutrients are flowing. It attracts animals. It sets the conditions that allow plants to grow in one place or not in another place. It can cause erosion and do a lot of damage. It can damage buildings and cause mold issues in buildings or structural rot issues in buildings. So it is a useful first thing in a site assessment to look at what water is doing in the system. And that is only one element of the system. It's just like you can't say in your body, blood is the most important part of your body. You would die without blood. Yeah. You'd also die without a liver, right? And we would not be human without our central nervous system, and we would be just a sack of flesh without our bones. So the same thing in a land system, and that the minerals, I think of the stones as the bones. The analogy actually goes very deep, because in our bodies, our bones have the blood marrow, which makes the blood, and that is similar to how in a landscape or an ecosystem, the stones are where the minerals originally come from, that are then circulated into the living layer, the soil and the plants and the animals. So that's actually the source of the minerals, and it's the mineral bank. The stones are the mineral bank in the landscape, just like our bones are in our bodies. And our bodies actually use our bones to store minerals in and then bring them back out, and store them and bring them back out. The bones are a bank for minerals. And then the nervous system is, a lot of people, think that fungi are the nervous system. Fungi act to carry messages between different plants in plants' root systems in the soil. Mycorrhizal fungi, which connect to the roots of plants and have an economy with them, and they actually exchange messages between different species of trees in a forest. and that animals maybe are part of the nervous system, and that the soil itself is the digestion. Because it is. It's what it has the saprobic fungi, the ones that break down dead things and turn them back into soil and make those nutrients available. So the soil is like the stomach of the forest, the stomach of the landscape. So you can start to get into that metaphor and look at what is the liver, what are the kidneys, what is everything, and that's actually really instructive. And it turns out that there are these kind of archetypal patterns to how living systems work, anything from our bodies to single-celled organisms to an entire ecosystem to the earth. There's an analogy where all these different archetypal functions have to be filled. There's a lot to be learned, I think, from that comparison. So I would agree that water is one of the first things we look at, but also vegetation and also minerals and soil pH and wind and sun access and all those, and human activity. All those things are looked at in tandem to do permaculture design.
Sure.
Yeah.
But I guess what Robert was saying is that the first step, or what he derived from Bill Mollison, was that in designing permaculture. And granted, permaculture has come a long way since 1981. But still, what he was saying is that the first thing you do is you design a permaculture farm or
system,
area. By considering how you can actually trap water in the landscape. You don't want the water, whatever falls from the sky, whatever flows into the land, you want to keep there as long as possible, rather than having it run off and into causing soil erosion and all of that stuff. You want it to stay where it is, and so he talked about building a system of what was the term he used?
Swales or I think that's an application of a more generalizable principle. In permaculture design, there are between 12 and 20 design principles that, depending on which lineage of permaculture that we use to design, and what those are mimicking insights from natural ecosystems. And one of the principles is catching and storing energy. And so catching water high in the landscape, especially high elevation, is one way to practice that principle, because you're storing gravity by catching water high in the system. If you catch water at 2,200 feet as opposed to 2,000 feet, then that means that you've got all that water pressure to use and distribute water through the landscape without exerting extra energy. But another way to catch and store energy is with plants, because plants are catching and storing the sun's energy. And solar panels are another way of catching and storing energy.
Right.
And money can be a way of catching and storing energy. If someone has a property near a highway, to start selling things to people driving by on the highway, and then the people driving by are stopping in and buying farmed goods, and that's catching and storing that energy. So that's another insight from natural systems and organisms, is that we always find ways to catch useful energy, and even to catch things that are toxic or in a non-useful form, and to convert them into a useful form. So for instance, if you're living downhill of a cattle farming operation, and the runoff from the cattle operation could be seen as a pollutant, but if you're designing with permaculture, you'd figure out a way to catch those nutrients running off in the water every time it rains, and put them into the soil, or catch them with fungi, or bioremediate them and make them useful. So catching and storing energy, I think the water in the landscape is an example of that.
Okay. So you're going to be teaching a series of classes on permaculture here in Dillsboro, actually, in the coming year.
Yeah.
Talk about that a little bit.
Yes, it's a really exciting thing that's going to be happening over at Dr. Graham Potter's property, and she has a kind of a rural country doctor practice going already, where she takes people into her office, her home office, and helps people to develop holistic health care for their lives, practices, not just dealing with immediate symptoms. And she has a vision for a long-term community health center and retreat where people can come and stay and learn different skills and knowledge around holistic health. and she's engaged me to help develop a permaculture plan for the property to serve that vision. That'll have food and medicine production and buildings and water systems and everything, and be a demonstration site for sustainable living, and to help other people learn about those things and how they're connected with human health. And so we have said, well, it's not good enough to just get her land project going on. She wants to have a community of people who are thinking this way in Jackson County, and so we're going to have this. I think we're going to call it the Jackson County Permaculture Support Group, to go with the medical theme. Support group. We even talked about what would the permaculture 12-step program look like, and we're going to be meeting for 5 different sessions through next year, from April through October, to have different parts of her design process be shared with permaculture learning community, and then I'm going to teach different sections related to different permaculture content, so that folks can go home and apply that at their own properties and develop a kind of a working group together that can help to assess each other's properties, develop permaculture strategies for them, and then actually do physical work together to implement those strategies.
Okay, and can you say off the top of your head what those 5 courses would be covering?
Let's see. The first one is an introductory toolkit, and talking about the permaculture design process, and kind of familiarizing people with what the big picture is. The second one is going to be talking about water, energy, buildings, roads, the kind of big infrastructural pieces of permaculture systems. And each time we'll be talking about a phase of her design process as well as an example. So we'll have her design that we're in the midst of doing as a case study. The third one is going to be on animals, plants, fungi, and social and economic systems. The fourth one is going to be walking her site together and talking through the installation projects that we're going to do. So we're going to actually, because a big part of successful permaculture projects is knowing how to plan implementations and actually set up a work party and get materials lists and budgets together. We're going to do that time. And then the last one is going to be a work class, when we'll come together and have a big permaculture makeover, kind of like those TV shows where they come and make over someone's kitchen in one day. It'll be like that, but we'll do some big installation work of several priority features of her permaculture plan, and that'll be in late October. So yeah, again, that'll be from April through late October. And those exact dates, we're working on getting a Jackson County Permaculture Support Group Facebook page up, so people can check that out in the upcoming week or so.
And will it cost something for people to participate?
There will be a low cost. I actually don't know what that's going to be offhand. It's going to be very affordable, though.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Mountain Stream TV will be there trying to cover some of the activities and talks.
Yeah.
For
that's
those. Great. Yeah.
Yeah.
And also you're going to New Zealand this this January. You're heading out, and what's going to happen in New Zealand?
Well, so many things, I think, but New Zealand is a hotbed of permaculture, certainly, and I think, I don't know what that owes to. There's a different cultural and political climate there, which I think has been conducive to permaculture. It's also close to Australia, which is where permaculture originated, and so there are a lot of different permaculture projects that have been going on for a very long time, and eco-villages, and there's the surviving Maori culture there, which is more intact than a lot of the native North American cultures, and a lot of people who have been working in the permaculture field for over 30 years. Hey, Justin.
I didn't know if you were holding forth on camera or something.
We are.
You are?
Yeah. Say hi.
Hello.
Yeah.
Holding forth. Talking about New Zealand. And so I'm looking forward to engaging with a lot of people there and seeing a lot of successful projects, and then we're going to teach a permaculture design certification course in February and March, a 21-day course.
Yeah, that's great. Big doings.
Yeah.
And so, welcome Justin. This is Justin Holt.
Hi. Okay.
And Justin and Zev have started, I don't know, we've been going for several years. How many years now? I
think
with the kudzu camp?
Eighth,
Well,
I think. Yeah.
If you count
Yeah,
Michelle's.
2011 is the first year that we came out to Abrams. And
Wow.
Yeah.
So 2011. So that's 6.
No, well,
That's,
11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. We're going
but if we're going into
Right.
18, that's true.
18,
Yeah. Okay.
yeah.
So
We finished our Shabbat year, right? Is that a thing where you take the 7th year off?
The Shemitah?
Shemitah, that's right.
Oh, we missed that year. Okay.
Oh, isn't that what's the
Oh, I forgot that we missed
We'll
that.
have to
what's
do
the
it on
name
the
of
next
that
7.
church in Asheville on Wall Street? Or the
Oh, Jubilee?
Jubilee. That's
That's a 49th year. That's every
year of
7
Jubilee?
7. That's every 7 7.
Oh, okay.
But the Shemitah is the 7th year. In the
Every
Jewish-
7 years, supposed to forgive all debts,
and leave your kudzu to be gathered by the poor and the homeless
right.
and the wild animals.
So we have something called Kudzu Camp, which is held at Kudzu U, Kudzu University in Dillsboro, let's talk more about that. The idea is to stop viewing kudzu as our enemy and a big problem, and start to understand the value of the plant and how to use it as it is done prolifically throughout the Far East. And so let's talk about this year's kudzu that's coming up and what's on the agenda for that, the kudzu camp.
Yeah, it's March 16th, 17th, and 18th are the dates.
Mm-hmm.
And what we'll do is essentially go through what we do every year is process kudzu root starch from basically from start to as far as we can get it in a 3-day period.
Right. It's actually a 2-week process, right?
But we will harvest kudzu roots from the hillside at Kudzu U, and
Some of those roots might be as large as your grandmother.
yeah, it'd be a small grandmother.
A small grandmother.
But yeah. And we'll wash them and pound them up, or cut them up and then pound them up and then dissolve the starches and
We're not
very
talking
cold
about
water.
grandmothers
No,
here.
no, just to be clear.
Yeah, it'd have to be a starchy grandmother for that to be worth it. And then the starches will dissolve out and then they'll settle and we'll siphon off the water, and we can go into more detail later if you want to do that. But and then what we'll do is also we'll share kudzu dishes that we make from kudzu that we processed last year during kudzu camp.
Yeah, the whole thing is what we call an experimental skill share. It's a kind of an innovative model of working and learning that we're developing, kind of getting better at each year. That the idea is that it's not exactly a workshop that we're charging for and teaching the whole time, but we do some sharing of research and experience that we've done, and then we also are just all learning the whole time, and there's constant conversation going on about kudzu and all of the amazing uses for it. Every single part of the plant is useful, and there are economies around each part of the plant in Southeast Asia and Japan, and it's really fun with the fire, and we do cooking outside, and it usually ends up being miraculously warm even though it's in March. And
We did have snow one year.
but then it melted in time for us to dig kudzu roots.
We actually built a snowman
With kudzu root arms,
That's
if I
right,
recall
kudzu root
correctly.
arms, right.
Yeah, it might be the only snowman with kudzu root arms
Right.
made that year in the world.
Possibly.
The light.
I got it.
And yeah, right. And the reason that we're doing all this not only is because kudzu is such a valuable plant, has such valuable yields, but also that there is so much of it in the southeast, somewhere between 700,000 and 7 million acres, depending on the highly debatable numbers that we find. Right?
I'm going for somewhere between there. I would say 3.
3 million. Justin says 3 million acres of kudzu in the southeast U.S. And so it's like we had 3 million acres of sweet potatoes growing and no one was harvesting them. So we feel like it's our obligation or our duty to harvest kudzu roots and to learn how to.
And that's an interesting history in itself. I mean, there was at one time a lot more kudzu in the southeast than there is now. I understand. We only have like 15% of what used to be, and the reason is because of the eradication program, and the environmental devastation that takes place, that has taken place because of that eradication program. I mean, let's talk about that a little bit. How the way we have poisoned the earth around us using really toxic herbicides containing dioxins and many other deadly chemicals that have run off into our creeks and streams, and who really, I don't know that a thorough study has been done to talk about the ramifications of that type of herbicide, widespread herbicide use, and all because of the way, really a prejudice against kudzu, in a sense.
Exactly.
Yeah, very narrow thinking. Right?
Well, it was originally brought here. Do you know about the history of kudzu? Let's talk about it. Yeah.
Right.
Why was kudzu brought to the United States?
Right. The kudzu initially landed on U.S. soil in 1876 at the Centennial celebration. There was a garden in Philadelphia where they were creating a Japanese type ornamental garden. And so that's when it first arrived, and people started to become aware of it and started to plant it as like a shade plant for their porch. And it was spread for a while as an ornamental, and then some farmers started to catch on to it and started to plant it as a perennial cover crop and for livestock fodder, and it started to slowly become popular throughout the southeast. And then it wasn't really planted on a massive scale until like the 1930s and 40s, when the Soil Erosion Service and the Civilian Conservation Corps were actually paying people to plant it. And they were hiring the U.S. These are U.S. government programs. I think that they were paying $20 a hectare to plant kudzu on private land, and then they had a big program to plant millions of acres of public land. And basically, they were using the kudzu as an emergency response to intense erosion that was happening, and fear of runaway erosion from decades of farming on steep slopes and tillage on steep slopes,
building roads in places where maybe roads shouldn't have been built.
Roads and railroads, exactly. Yeah. And also deforestation, of course. And so by the 1950s, it was like there were millions and millions of acres that were planted in kudzu intentionally, and it was called the miracle vine. It was planted for the specific purpose of halting erosion, and it does that incredibly well. And so people were jubilant, and then it also was really catching on among farmers. There was a guy named Channing Cope who was a radio show host in Atlanta, and he bought this 700-acre farm, and it was like really severely eroded, and he couldn't really grow anything on it. And then he planted a bunch of kudzu and was able to raise, within a few years, really healthy herd of livestock. And he became the kudzu evangelist, and he started the Kudzu Club of America.
Where was he located?
I think it was in Atlanta.
Yeah,
or near
Georgia. Okay.
Somewhere in Georgia, yeah. And right, I forget. I think the Kudzu Club of America had like over 1 million members.
Wow.
Throughout the southeast, there were towns that were having celebrations of they would name a kudzu queen, and they would have a kudzu parade.
Not pagan at all, though.
Right. Yeah, Wile E. Kudzu. Yeah. So right. Yeah. It has a history of actually being a great boon to our area,
in the beginning,
to our economy.
Yeah.
In the beginning, right. And then the story kind of takes a turn around the 1950s, when actually it's really interesting. It was after several years of crop failure of cotton caused a lot of people to abandon farming and move into cities and basically leave these kudzu patches totally unattended, and
Because they were tended by the same people who were tending cotton, and then the boll weevil came along.
Right, right. Yeah, by keeping livestock on it and
Right.
cutting it for hay and right, and so, you know, at that point kudzu was just left to its own devices, and I think by 1970 it was taken, or by mid 1950s it was taken off a list of like officially sanctioned cover crop plants, and then by the 70s it was called a noxious weed and become, you know, and then, you know, today it's kind of like the poster child of invasive species.
Right.
So,
but some of the properties, one of the reasons why it was so popular as an animal feed is because of its extremely high protein content.
right.
And as I understand it, it's got the highest protein content of any green leafy vegetable on the planet. It's like 23%
Yeah, I don't know.
protein.
I know it's often said to be comparable to alfalfa in its protein content. I don't know about its ranking, but
On the planet, yeah.
for sure it's up there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think alfalfa is 20 or 21%, and kudzu I've heard 23%.
Yeah, so at Kudzu Cow Farm in Rutherford County, just a little bit east of here, they're actually cutting and baling kudzu and selling it at those premium prices that you would sell bales of alfalfa for. They're getting the same price.
Sometimes, especially during times of drought, there's a shortage of hay and
Right.
animal feed, and so it's become valuable for that. And I can tell you, I mean, I have 3 acres of kudzu on my land, and I had when we first moved to Western North Carolina, we got goats. And we had 6 goats on that land, and they grew to be enormous goats and rambunctious goats. But they were very healthy animals, just eating primarily kudzu. I don't know what I'm doing. I keep on unplugging this.
I'll scoot over so you can get a little farther.
You know, it's not bad. But anyway.
Yeah, and Justin was talking about the kudzu queens and the festivals, and that's a piece that is a kind of a larger theme of the way that we've been trying to develop a relationship with kudzu is the idea of having a culture around a plant, and just like Native Americans have culture around corn, and people from Europe had culture around barley or apricots or dates or wine. So there is a kudzu culture that has existed in the places where kudzu is from, and the problem is that we brought kudzu here, but we didn't bring the culture with it. We didn't bring the awareness of how to relate, of how humans could relate to the plant and make food and medicine and fiber and manage it in the landscape. And in Japan, kudzu is not a pest plant because there's a natural predator, which is us, humans. And so it's interesting to look at the evolutionary history of kudzu and think about what animals maybe evolved with that were eating those giant roots before humans were, but now it's people. And so in Japan, my understanding is that there are kudzu territories, and the different harvesters covet those territories because it's that valuable. And in the U.S., though, we don't have that. And so you start to really see that kind of permaculture theme, which is that humans are part of ecosystems, I say permaculture, permaculture didn't invent that. Indigenous people, all of our indigenous ancestors invented that. We were part of ecosystems just like all the other organisms, and we interacted. And so the problem is that we disconnect ourselves and say kudzu is an enemy and a demon, and therefore we're not going to relate with kudzu, and then it becomes an enemy and a demon because we're not relating with it and harvesting it and managing it in the landscape. And so what we're trying to do is start up a kudzu culture again in the U.S. and develop what would it mean to have a culture of use and respect for the kudzu plant, and actually then seeing how that transforms the behavior and can help to bring other species into balance. And so that's what our website is, by the way, too, is kudzuculture.net. If people want to go and see more information as it's getting up there about kudzu and articles, and sign up to our newsletter and that kind of stuff, and see dates about future events. And by the way, we have a summer camp too. Each summer it's called Kudzu Vine Camp, which focuses on the vines and the leaves, the aerial parts of the plant, whereas the winter camp is Kudzu Root Camp, and that's focusing on the roots. So yeah, that's what we're looking at, is how do we develop a culture around that. And this is going to be an important experience to have as a species, because there are many plant species coming in. There's something like 150 or 170 invasive exotic plants just in the southeast already, and there are going to be more coming in as the climate continues to change and opens up niches, and as pests and diseases kill native trees and open up gaps in our ecosystem that so-called invasive exotic plants can fill. There are going to be many more species coming in, so we need to get this skill down of how to develop cultures around other plant species, develop relationships with them, and then again we harvest them to make, whether it's food or medicine or charcoal for biochar or animal fodder or clothing. We need to learn how to develop relationships with all these species and to creatively respond to that change, rather than just demonizing plant species when they come in and then they become the demons that we turn them into. So this kudzu is a grand practice case for that, I think, is one way to think of it. Yeah.
And but kudzu, in addition, I mean, yeah, we can look at it as the worst enemy, or we can look at it as our best friend, because I mean, in Japan and Korea and China, kudzu is used for food, for medicine, for clothing and rope fiber, for paper, for so many different, life's necessities.
Yeah.
It's such a resilient plant, and again, that can be looked at as something horrible if it's an enemy, or something that's just it spells survival for us, and because during the worst of droughts, it doesn't seem to impact kudzu because its roots go so deep into the ground that it's an insurance policy for us. If all else fails, we can always eat kudzu.
Yeah, throughout history it's been a famine food.
Yeah.
Farmers have planted it exactly for that throughout Asia, throughout East Asia.
And there are these anecdotes of the Japanese during World War II, when they weren't able to import food because of the war, that a lot of them went to eating kudzu roots, and that all the people who had digestive ailments healed during that time period from eating roasted kudzu roots.
It's not just the root; it's the whole plant.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sure. But we just
that is edible, even in certain stages.
Yep.
And I've made soup stock out of the leaf and vine. You just put it in a blender and make soup stock out of it. That breaks down the cell. It's got a very thick cell wall, so it's not very digestible except the cows and goats.
You need a few stomachs.
Yeah.
What?
You need a few stomachs.
We'll be installing extra stomachs.
But if you blend it into small particles and break down the cell walls and then cook it, it becomes digestible.
Yeah, and there's this whole thing about like a leaf protein concentrates, right? And that can be used basically like you're talking about, and then processed like tofu.
Right.
Yeah.
Kudzu leaf tofu.
Well, I've never heard of that.
Yeah.
That sounds
that's something I haven't quite explored.
No, we need it. Maybe we'll do it this year. In the summer. Yeah, right. And if the super volcano in Yellowstone Park erupts and there's no photosynthesis on the planet for a year or two,
Right.
we'll have our stockpile of kudzu roots in the ground.
Roots,
That's right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or a nuclear disaster, you know.
God forbid.
It's a God forbid, right?
Yeah.
But it's a deep rooted plant that I you know, in some of my reading I came upon that it's there's like the nuclear radiation reaches 6 or 8 inches into the soil, and so below that there's not many other food plants that are grown below that level.
Soil horizon.
Yeah.
Kudzu goes down 14 feet in some places. Yeah.
We haven't dug an inch past 13 feet at kudzu camp.
Yeah.
You mentioned kudzu vine camp. Can I show some things off?
Ooh,
Yes.
yeah.
All right. Well, I'll go ahead and start with this.
Oh, look at that. That's beautiful.
Yeah, this is a pretty little shiny white basket. This is from the core fiber of the young current season's
I'm going to
growth.
zoom in on that.
Okay.
Excuse me.
Great.
Yeah.
I'm not much of a basket maker.
You made that?
I made this. Yeah, this is one of my
Just hold it up.
probably third or fourth.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Look at that.
Yeah, it's a really nice, vibrant white color that comes from that. And I imagine it would hold a dye fairly well if one were so inclined. And so that's just a simple coiled basket.
But that's using a byproduct of the fiber making in
Right.
summer,
Right,
Of the fiber
exactly.
extraction, right?
Yeah, exactly. So that's the byproduct. This is the main product we're going for at the Vine Camp. And this is
how shiny that is.
the bast fiber. So right underneath the bark, the green bark of the young vines is this, nice, shiny, lustrous, strong bast fiber that encases the whole core of the plant. This is the core fiber, and then this is the bast, and then this is used. So the process is to harvest the vines. You want really long, straight ones that are unbranched, and you cut them and then coil them up, and then you want to cook them for about an hour, and then the traditional way to do it in Japan is to lay them in a pit after they've been cooked with miscanthus grass, which has a specific, I think, species that of bacteria on it that helps it ferment. That process is called retting, R-E-T-T-I-N-G, when you ferment a fiber to help make it workable and break it down a bit. And then after several days of that, you can separate these two and clean the bark off. Our process has actually been to do it anaerobic fermentation in a bucket. It gets really stinky. But then we just dump the vines in a creek and do this in the midsummer when it's hot, and it's really fun to just like hang out in the creek and wash vines with your friends, and create these really beautiful fibers that can be used for weaving. And the first attempt I did on a tabletop loom of weaving yielded this strap here, pretty coarse. Can you see that? Yeah. So the long fibers on that, the warp, are actually corded kudzu. So I made cordage from the kudzu, and then strung those out, and then used fibers just like this for the weft to weave back and forth underneath them, or between them. And that made this little strap here. And then also we worked with a woman named Melanie Wilder, who is a fiber artist and instructor at Warren Wilson. She's into cool local wild fibers and dyes, and she was excited to work with us, and she created these beautiful kind of samples.
This is all kudzu fiber?
Well, the warp on these are linen and cotton. I think linen on this one, and this one and cotton on this one. I'm not sure.
I see.
And that's
so
the
it's a
traditional
mixture.
way to do
It's
it.
a mixture
Yeah.
of fibers. Okay.
Right, and that's actually how it's done. How kudzu's used mostly from what I understand, in Japan.
Silk often in the warp and kudzu in the west.
Like
kimonos,
kimonos,
or
I
cotton.
guess. Japanese kimonos. Yeah.
Yeah, and other traditional garments. Yeah. Yeah. So there it is.
And is that's so you wouldn't necessarily use the fiber to make by itself in a fabric because it's too brittle or what? Or too rough? I mean, why do you need the blend?
Yeah, it doesn't make a really great warp. I think because of it's not super strong in that context. Is that right?
Well, I think it might be strong enough, but also it's because you need a continuous warp.
Right.
And kudzu, it's kudzu. You can see the texture of it is this kind of shiny, slippery texture. Unlike wool that has microscopic scales on it that bind the fibers together and allow you to have continuous spun yarn, you can't spin kudzu into a continuous thread. It's traditionally knotted with these special knots, and those knots on a warp, which is the long fibers on a loom, make it so you can't pull the weft down because the weft would hit the knots.
Okay.
So you need a continuous fiber on the warp, and it's very hard to make continuous. Although I did read about people in Tennessee, at the University of Tennessee, who are working with like an industrial enzymatic process to break down kudzu fiber to smaller sizes that it could be spun. So if we could figure out a way to spin kudzu, which I actually did some at kudzu fiber camp this last time, it was tricky, but I was like pounding it on a log and stuff to loosen the fibers up. Then I was able to spin it. Then you could use kudzu for both the warp and the weft.
So that's interesting. So we're not the only ones doing this. The University of Tennessee is actually doing experimentation with kudzu.
I mean, there's been a fair amount of experimentation with kudzu in general. Yeah.
That's an interesting thing because I mean the processes that I've seen you using are the same. The sort of primitive processes that are used in Japan for working with kudzu in a very manually intensive process, labor-intensive process. But it's conceivable, and I guess at the University of Tennessee, maybe they're doing this. They're trying to figure out how to modernize the process somewhat and make it more commercially feasible and practical.
Yeah.
Right. That way too.
Yeah. Exactly, which is maybe a good idea. Could be. Yeah. Wow.
That's beautiful. Those fabrics.
Yeah. Yeah, and so I wanted to share the there's a Japanese saying in Japan about kudzu cloth, and that the first generation wears it as a coat, and the second generation wears it as a shirt, and then the third wears it as an undergarment, as underwear. So it gets softer over time, and it's durable, it's long-lived. So, maybe in a few years we'll have a coat made that in a few generations our grandchildren will be wearing as underwear.
Right. That would be the blessing of kudzu culture. May your children have kudzu underwear. Your grandchildren. May your grandchildren have kudzu underwear.
Well, that's interesting. So it lasts a long time. And is it treated with anything to... It just...
No, just that retting process makes it workable, and then, this was dyed with indigo. But yeah.
Which is derived from... What's indigo derived?
Plant indigo.
Okay.
I don't know.
The flower, maybe?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think it's the whole aerial plant.
Is blue?
No, but it yields a blue. A lot of dye plants create a different color than the plant itself is.
How? Just when they get heated or something?
Yeah, or mixed with other compounds.
I see.
Yeah. Now Junko had that kudzu cloth that she had made that was shellacked with poison ivy lacquer, right? right?
Yeah.
Because that's a traditional source of lacquer. One traditional source is sap from the poison ivy plant. And she tapped these giant poison ivy vines like you would tap a maple tree for maple syrup, drew the sap off, boiled it down for days, and made this lacquer. And
sounds like a dangerous process.
she did. She got a systemic case of poison ivy from it, she said. But there are people who somehow have done it and not get systemic.
I'm sure there's a right way to do it.
And she had kudzu cloth she had made like this, and then covered it with this shiny coating of poison ivy lacquer. Yeah, she brought that to your house. That one for in the.
And since I've been,
it was like 4 years ago. Wow.
But so apparently that lacquer doesn't have the same properties
Right.
as the.
Apparently not.
Yeah, that's interesting.
That's the artist Junko Sato Pollock. I think I'm saying her name right. She's a Japanese American woman who is living near Atlanta and does all kinds of interesting fiber art kind of stuff.
Yeah, I remember when Junko came. Is she invited this year too?
Always invited.
Yeah.
If you're watching this, Junko, please come to Kudzu Camp.
Yeah, that'd be great.
But she's busy. She's doing a lot down there. She only made it 1 year.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that same year we had Nancy Baskett come.
Right.
Yeah, and so she's another kudzu fiber artist.
Yeah.
Nancy Baskett.
Nancy Baskett, yeah.
That's a perfect name. It's a Dixonian name, sort of. You know how Charles Dickens used to name his characters
After their favorite
after
activities.
the description. I mean, the names were descriptive of the characters.
Mythological.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, she is a basket maker, and she's also a sculptor. She makes amazing giant sculptures out of kudzu, and she mostly uses the big vines that you see growing up the trees, and then she splits them down, shreds them into much smaller fibers, and sometimes peels the bark off and uses that in a specific way before shredding it into smaller fibers. And she's been making she'll make big light fixtures and stuff that she ships to restaurants, like fine restaurants, and I forget where, somewhere in California and in New York. And she's also a keeper and storyteller of Cherokee descent, and she I think I've seen some big sculptures of some mythological, some characters from Cherokee mythology.
Okina.
Yeah.
And also her studio is made from kudzu bales.
That's right, yeah.
It's built from kudzu bales like one would build from straw bales.
Is this just the person in northern Georgia?
It's Nancy
right?
Baskett, yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
But then also our very own Jeff Gottlieb over here in Western North Carolina built his house out of kudzu bales.
And Jeff, incidentally, is going to have a regular show on Mountain Stream TV coming up on Earth Skills.
Excellent.
And I'm sure kudzu will be a part of that. Yeah.
I imagine so.
Yeah, that's right. He made a house out of
kudzu bales.
Kudzu bales, right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Who else was there? Doug Elliott came that same year. That
was epic.
That was really epic.
That's come a couple of times. Yeah. He innovated the hatchet method for cutting kudzu roots down. Yeah.
Sort of another mythological, a present-day mythological figure, Doug Elliott.
Yes.
Robert Itis talked about him too. We just did a ginseng marketplace in Madison County that Robert organized with the Agricultural Extension Agency, and they played some music by Doug Elliott about ginseng.
Yeah.
I think he's also probably written something about kudzu.
I can't imagine that he wouldn't.
Yeah.
Well, certainly groundhogs. Doug is really big into groundhogs, which are part of the kudzu guild.
Right.
It's a whole permaculture concept that we work with, or are seeking to work with the kudzu, is the idea of guilds, which is groups of organisms that live in kind of a tight little food web ecosystem together. And in permaculture, we try to mimic that and say, how can we have a guild of organisms that work together and create all useful yields for humans? And so groundhogs are definitely part of the kudzu guild They dig holes in the kudzu. They probably allow water to percolate into the soil by digging their holes and catching water during rain events. And although they build a mound around the hole too, so I'm not sure. But we've also noticed other plants growing with kudzu. Even though everyone describes kudzu as a monoculture, it's really not. There are other plants that grow in and amongst the kudzu on the edges, including
blackberries, a lot of blackberries.
Stinging nettles also, which are a very valuable food and medicine and fiber plant on their own. And it's all about, a lot of times guilds are about timing, and kudzu doesn't really get growing until it gets really warm, so like mid-May or early June even. By that time, kudzu, or nettles rather, have been growing since late February. You can harvest nettles out of the kudzu patch for 3 months before the kudzu gets big enough to overcome the nettles. Also wineberries we've noticed growing in kudzu. Burdock is another root crop that will grow in and amongst it.
Pokeweed too.
Yeah, poke will grow in there sometimes. And then
I've got a huge amount of poke on that.
Yeah, you've got a poke farm along with your kudzu farm. Poke kudzu polyculture. And then a big one that we've been noticing is black walnut. We've been noticing the only tree growing in your kudzu patch and surviving are black walnuts.
Yeah.
And so we looked into that more, and we found that kudzu is what's called an allelopathic plant. Allelopaths make compounds that prevent other plants from uptaking nutrients and prevent other plants' seeds from germinating. So it's a competitive strategy. Black walnut also famously is an allelopath, and we think that they might be able to grow together because they have similar allelopathic compounds and can therefore tolerate each other's allelopathic compounds. So we're actually developing this idea at Avram's place where we're kind of trying to mimic what's going on there already, where we see kudzu growing up in trees, but it's actually rarely killing the trees, right? It's a big one of the things that's used to demonize kudzu is people say kudzu kills trees, and we're like, well, it does sometimes, but usually it doesn't kill them. It has to totally overtop a tree's canopy to starve it of light and kill the tree. If it's just growing up in the branches, then it's just a trellis. It's just trellised kudzu, like your grapes are trellised or something. And we've noticed and learned from people who have been working on kudzu eradication near Atlanta, right? That was where you first got the idea about that.
Yeah, South Carolina.
South Carolina. Oh, okay. That the biggest kudzu roots grow on plants that are trellised into trees, rather than growing along the ground, where they send out multiple roots and distribute their energy through multiple small roots. So we've noticed the biggest, nicest roots are growing at the base of vines that are growing up at the trees. So he said, well, what if we actually begin planting black walnuts into the kudzu patch and developing a polyculture where the kudzu is growing up into the branches of the black walnuts. We're getting walnuts from the system as well. The kudzu, which is a legume, therefore fixing nitrogen, is fertilizing the walnuts. There are little happy groundhogs running all around that we harvest occasionally for food as well. Good kudzu-fed groundhog, who can complain.
Fat.
Yeah, fat
groundhog.
Absolutely, they're healthy and
and numerous.
Exactly. We got nettles growing in there, and so actually a guild working with kudzu as part of a guild, an element of a long-term land management system with multiple yields. And so that's again kind of a totally different kudzu culture attitude that we're trying to adapt to the plant, is to say, well, how can we get people managing this and show how it's a truly productive long-term system, where we might actually ultimately say, oh, we have to restrict how much kudzu we harvest because it's such a valuable resource that we have to manage a kudzu patch through a rotational scheme to make sure that we don't harvest too many kudzu roots and deplete the supply. And I can easily imagine that. I mean, already at your place, after harvesting for a number of years, we're having to be careful of which roots we harvest amongst the trees because we want to not kill all the big grandmother roots.
Yeah, among those big roots, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I also noticed that when you grow it near trees, the trellised kudzu produces many more flowers than the one on the ground.
Yeah, we noticed that too.
And the flowers have value as well for various things.
Right. I think that's the main part used for treating alcoholism. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's
I thought that was the root. No.
Well, I think the root is implicated in that too, but my understanding is it is the flowers that are the main part that's being researched for dealing with alcoholism.
Yeah, this big research project about how kudzu roots was able to cure alcoholism in rats
Right.
in white rats. And I know here in Jackson County we have a huge problem with alcoholic rats going around.
It's all the new microbreweries. Rats are just, you know, it's like cheap beer, cheap good beer, you know.
No, but it does. In all seriousness, apparently there is some relationship between kudzu root powder and blood sugar alcohol.
Or blood sugar.
Or blood sugar.
Yeah,
excuse me.
Yeah.
And so it's an immensely healthy food to eat for that reason, because that is a big problem. It has to do not only with alcoholism but diabetes.
Yeah.
And osteoporosis. Right. Go into that a little bit, if you will, about the.
Oh yeah, the relationship. Well, there's this whole relationship between blood sugar cycles and the way that minerals are cycled in the body. Mm-hmm. And when we have blood sugar spikes, that creates a dynamic of blood acidification, and the body, in order to counter that and keep our pH of our blood at steady 7.1, which it has to be or we die, then the body temporarily pulls alkaline minerals, alkaline ions, calcium and magnesium out of the bones and teeth and puts them into the blood to keep the blood at a steady pH. But then, if there's not a return of a steady state of minerals in the diet, then those minerals stay in the bloodstream and then we piss them out. And as a long-term dynamic, if we're constantly eating foods that tend toward blood acidification, the body's constantly having to compensate by mining calcium and magnesium from the bones and teeth, and that will lead to tooth decay and bone density loss. And so, otherwise osteoporosis, otherwise known as osteoporosis. So kudzu, and there are a whole suite of foods, but kudzu is a really renowned one for being part of a blood sugar balancing diet that prevents the body having to do that type of mineral mining from the bones in order to keep the blood pH constant. And so, like, what we've read is that kudzu and millet are the only two starchy food sources, or at least major starchy food sources in the world, that are alkalinizing. That means their mineral content is such that the body doesn't have to compensate for the mineral content by mining it from the bones and teeth.
And part of that, at least, is because it has a high calcium content.
I've been meaning to look into that. I'm not sure if you read that it actually has high calcium content.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I'm not. Yeah. So maybe so. And mm-hmm.
It's really amazing how little research has been done into kudzu. The content of kudzu and kudzu leaf. I tried. For a while I was making, and I still do make wheatgrass juice.
Right.
With my little press. and I did some experimentation with other plants, including kudzu. And what I found, when I ground up the kudzu leaf, I just did it with the leaf.
Yeah.
To try to get the what's the green part of the
chlorophyll.
Chlorophyll content.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that's what you're shooting for.
Yeah.
Try to get the chlorophyll content out of it. In the process, you're breaking down the thick cell walls that prevent you from digesting grass, for instance.
Right.
But you certainly can digest wheatgrass juice.
Right. Because
you're removing that heavy cell wall content.
Right.
And so I did that with kudzu leaf, and drank some of it. And I can tell you, first of all, in the process of grinding it, it filled the house
that smell
with an odor, a very, very strong odor, which isn't by itself a terrible odor, but it's very strong, and after a while, it is terrible.
Gets to you.
Uh-huh. And that blew me away. That it was releasing all of this energy, at once when you grind it up like that. But I looked it up. I spent hours looking on the internet for research about what is actually the chemical nutrient content of the leaf.
Yeah.
And I couldn't find anything other than the protein content and the fact that. But I would bet anything that it's just rich and medicinal, and it probably has similar compounds into it that wheatgrass juice has, which is very well known for its medicinal, content and its ability to stimulate the immune system and that's a whole area of research that still needs to be done, and I don't think anybody's doing it right now. So
I mean, we've come up with these lists at Kudzu Camp, but we've kept big pads of paper where people can just go write questions up there during it. We've come up with lists of dozens of research questions about kudzu, because there's so much that's unknown, and we've fantasized about getting together a troupe to go over to Japan, and like the people who wrote William Shirtliff did, right? That's his name.
And we actually called him one night during Kudzu Camp.
Right, this is the author of the Book of Kudzu. We called him William Shirtliff, and he answered.
And where he was in California.
Yeah.
He's one of the authors.
Yeah, thank you.
Along with.
Let's tell that story. Yeah, that's the Book of Kudzu. Let me zoom in on that. This is the Bible of American people and kudzu enthusiasts.
But it might just be the first book of the Bible, and then we're going to write the rest of the Bible.
The New Testament.
Yeah, that might be the Old Testament.
Right.
We're going to write the Kudzu New Testament. Revelations. Kudzu Revelations.
Yeah. Actually, Revelation is the Old Testament.
Yeah.
Just for your information.
We're gonna write the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Silva Dead Sea Scrolls.
Yeah.
We somehow just looked William Shirtliff up on the internet, found his number at the end of Kudzu Camp one year.
Sure enough, he was there. Yeah.
Called him, and he was telling us that this entire book was written from a few weeks of experience on a couple islands in Japan.
Like they had flights get changed or something. And we need something to do.
Right.
So let's explore this.
And so they wrote the Book of Kudzu that all knowledge in the U.S. of kudzu originates from, and it's wonderful. It's a wonderful book because they happened to be there in the timing when they got to see the kudzu's starch extraction process, which is only in the winter, but at the same time, though, there are many unanswered questions, and now that we've played around with this for 8 years or so, we have better questions to ask, and we thought, wow, if we could get a research troupe to go back to Japan and Southeast Asia and tour around to kudzu growing and processing facilities and cottage industries, we could probably learn a lot and bring good video equipment and and make a whole new round of research and learning about kudzu in the English language, because most of the research is not in English, it's in Japanese.
Yeah, or Chinese.
Chinese,
yeah.
Right.
And that was one of the barriers that he confronted also, was the language, as I remember, when he talked about this.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
But also talking about the kudzu leaf juice, kudzu is a legume, and legumes are notoriously bioactive. They have alkaloids in them. Alkaloids are the class of compounds that many medicinal and poisonous compounds in the world are in the alkaloid class. So that's also something just for everyone to be aware of, is that it's likely that kudzu leaves have some alkaloids in them. So in other words, not to take it lightly and drink huge amounts of kudzu leaf juice without understanding more about.
We need to do research about what's in it, but it's also good to point out that some of those alkaloids have very important uses outside of nutritional value.
Absolutely.
For making all, I believe soybeans, for instance, which also are a legume.
Right.
They're in the same tribe of the legume family, actually.
Right.
They're what?
They're in the same tribe of the legume family.
Oh, that's interesting.
As kudzu is, yeah.
Yeah. That all kinds of products are made from soybeans, including plastics and waxes. I keep going back to waxes.
Right.
I'm looking for a source. I used to be a candle maker.
Right.
And I'm looking for a non-petroleum source other than soybeans for wax. And all plants, according to research I've done, all green leafy plants have a wax layer that can be extracted and used. And with the proliferation of kudzu, it seems like a likely. But that's another, a possible fuel that, fuels and paint bases and just all kinds of uses for the more toxic elements. And all plants also have that toxins, element as protection, self-protection, for the most part. There's all this whole unknown field of what could be extracted from kudzu leaf.
And also from the roots. I mean, in the winter when we do the starch extraction process, we get hundreds of gallons of this dark black liquid that looks like coffee. It looks like espresso, kind of, doesn't it? And which is called a waste product of the starch extraction process, but it turns out that it's full of all of these bioflavonoids. Those are the compounds that make colors, the color compounds in plants, but are also vital parts of the plant metabolism and immune system. And there's what they call diadzin.
That's right.
Diazin, diadzin, purerin. Right, so there are all these unique bioflavonoids in kudzu roots that are being researched throughout Asia for all their medicinal effects, including one thing we were reading about was using them to stop heart attacks that are in progress.
That's interesting.
So it might turn out that this so-called byproduct of the kudzu starch process is more valuable even than the kudzu starch, which is saying something, because it involved medicinal compounds in there.
I know bioflavonoids. I mean, there was a lot of research done into how the role bioflavonoids play in the digestion of vitamins, and vitamin C in particular, because citrus plants contain a very high percentage of bioflavonoids
in the white stuff, right around
exactly. The stringy stuff inside the oranges and grapefruits, and that play a vital role in the digestion of vitamin C.
Very interesting, right?
Yeah.
Whole foods in that way.
I wonder if kudzu root has a vitamin C component to it as well. This is something that not a lot of plants in the northern hemisphere
have high vitamin C. Right. So many questions. So if anyone's out there and you want to fund kudzu research,
or if you're a grad student and looking for something to research, that's a good place to start.
Wide open field.
And we do have a body of about 40 or 50 papers that you found in a library search on different aspects of ecology and phytochemistry and stuff of kudzu. So it's not that there's nothing. And a literature review would certainly yield some places to start. You wouldn't be starting from nothing.
Where did you find it?
Just scouring JSTOR, and like the online academic journal
compendium.
Yeah. So I just searched every possible search term around kudzu, kuzu, pueraria,
Pueraria? I haven't heard that.
Well, that's the genus.
It's the genus of kudzu.
Pueraria.
Which, by the way, there are a bunch of different species too. 7 or 9 different species of kudzu. I think we only have one here right now. We're lacking in kudzu diversity.
Oh, in the United States, you mean? We only have one species?
Maybe 2.
Heard others,
Well, I think it's one. I think there's Montana was either Pueraria Montana is the old name and now it's Lobata, or it's vice versa. So you probably heard both names.
But it's the same thing.
No, I haven't heard.
There's one that's the species name is tuberosa, and that's like widely grown in parts of India. I'm pretty sure as a root crop, as a tuber.
Wow. That's not even processed for the starch, but just...
Well, I think it's for the starch. I don't think it actually is a tuber. I think it's probably a root.
Right, but it looks like a... Right, so people have cultivated varieties of kudzu, just like we cultivate varieties of sweet potatoes or corn or lettuce or whatever. Yeah. That would be another thing if we went over, especially with government permits. We could actually perhaps bring back propaganda.
Oh yeah, I'm sure they would love that.
Well, once we get kudzu culture going on, then it'll be a different attitude.
Yes.
And once everybody's crops of annuals start failing because of climate change-induced weather extremes.
Yeah.
We'll have to get Jimmy Carter elected president again. He was a proponent of kudzu.
Oh, really?
Well, there was this sort of comical film, mini documentary made about kudzu. I don't know if you've seen it.
No.
Kudzu. I forget what the name of it was now, but and part of it was an interview with Jimmy Carter.
Wow.
He said, "What do you think of it?" Because what they were doing was they were showing people on both sides of the issue and reading poetry and stuff about kudzu, mostly ridiculing it and telling about how terrible it is, and showing pictures of cars and houses and forests being covered by it,
Right.
And then they had other people who thought, including somebody calling herself the kudzu queen from South Carolina.
Oh.
She was on there, and she had kudzu vines covering her body, and it was kind of.
That's another thing, kudzu fashion, by the way.
Yeah, kudzu fashion. And then they shifted to Jimmy Carter, and they asked him what about it. What did he think about it as a peanut farmer? And he said, "Let it grow." Let it grow, it's all it's valuable. And he gave a bunch of reasons why it was valuable and it would save America and stuff like that.
Wow.
Yeah, and this was back in like 1975 or something. I think this was this documentary.
We need to get Bernie Sanders to into kudzu.
Yeah, I don't know.
And laying it down how Paul Ryan would want to eradicate all kudzu. But as your president, I will stand up for kudzu black walnut polycultures, and especially as related to healthcare costs.
You'd probably say, but keep it out of Vermont.
The good people.
Let it grow.
Yeah.
Harvest it. Distribute it evenly among your friends.
Yeah, that's right. It's not fair that 1% of the people get 90% of the kudzu starch.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's an inherently distributed form of wealth.
That's right.
And it's a crop of the people.
Yeah. Instead of grassroots, we got to organize from the kudzu roots up.
That's right.
Yeah, there's a lot of things to be learned through cultural kudzu mimicry, I think.
No doubt.
Yeah.
No doubt. So what else? So is there going to be a specific focus of the kudzu root camp this year? And what's the date? What's the date of the camp?
It's the 16th, 17th, and 18th of March.
Okay. 2018.
And you can sign up by emailing us at kudzuculture@gmail.com.
Kudzuculture@gmail.com.
It's culture with a C.
Yeah.
Maybe you should do it, K.
No, we abstained from it. We abstained from the second K.
Yeah, you don't want to get too close to 3 Ks.
No reason for that. And yeah, this year there will be something a little bit different in that in the past few years of Kudzu Camp, there have been a kind of a small group of people who, beyond myself and Zev and you, have been showing up and participating, and out of that we've kind of decided to start a Kudzu cooperative, also spelled
with a K.
Especially over the Kudzu Culture Cooperative, right?
Yeah, that'd be
fun. Yeah, there you go. Yeah. Right, yeah, and so the Kudzu Co-op is going to be gathering before Kudzu Camp starts to help dig the roots and get things all set up, so that when students arrive, things will kind of be in process, kind of like a cooking show. It's going to be like things are already in process a bit. And the idea there is also that we'll have more people working on harvesting, so that there'll be more overall yield, and then we get to share more of it. because that's as it's been now. The kudzu camp happens, and then Zev and I do the last couple weeks of processing, and then divide the yield between the two of us. But we're getting some more folks involved in that, and they can help us, on the front end of kudzu camp, and then also with some of the post-camp processing. And then we'll share the yield. And as this kind of grows and evolves, hopefully, it's like there'll be a kind of, like we were talking about, an even distribution of the yield among the various people who are involved. And and then other members of the cooperative are working on other things, kind of like little side projects. Like one is selling fresh roots actually to herbalists. It's something we've done in years past, and with our limited time, we haven't really been able to go as far into that as it seems like there's interest among herbalists for it. So
especially Chinese medicinal practitioners, traditional TCM.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So there've been people in Oregon and Pennsylvania, several other people who got in touch with us one way or another and bought fresh roots from us. And so one of the things with kudzu is a lot of it that is available here for medicinal use comes from China, and herbalists are pretty concerned about how clean herbal products coming from China are. There's a lot of, it's very there's very low levels of regulation around environmental pollutants in products.
Of course, nobody's going to spray kudzu to make it grow better. You don't need to do that in China.
Fertilize it, right?
Well, you don't need to fertilize it or anything. That's a great benefit,
right,
to farming kudzu in the United States. There's no maintenance, basically.
Yeah. I'm not sure exactly what pollutants. I'm imagining, it's just like environmental pollutants, like air pollution.
Well, they burn so much coal. That's the thing, and it's heavy metals, and that's an issue with all kinds of herbs that come from China. Yeah.
So. Anyway, that's one advantage we have here, is that we know that the kudzu here is coming from clean soil. It's not from we're not digging it from a pit on a roadside or something. We're digging it from a place where we know hasn't been the soil there hasn't been compromised or polluted.
Especially since the Clean Smokestacks Act was passed in 2002.
Well, it's not like we don't have air pollution here too, but yeah.
Not like China though.
Right.
Not like China.
Yeah. So anyway, there's another member of the co-op who's working on root sales, and
if you want to purchase roots from us, also you can go to the Kudzu Culture website.
You mentioned this program in the University of Tennessee. Do you know which branch of the University of Tennessee? Or?
No, just a paper I found searching online.
Well, it would be good to make contact with that group, know, and that department of the University of Tennessee, and see if we can have some kind of exchange with them. Then maybe they could. There may be some students who are participating in that who might want to participate in kudzu camp.
Yeah, that's a good idea. That's the kind of thing we're hoping the kudzu co-op can do, is kind of increase our capacity to follow the different connections and collaborations, because we've just been doing this as essentially like a volunteer experimental effort, right? We don't have a foundation or grant to fund it or anything like that. So we're hoping, I think the co-op is a strategy to get more organized, get people with different skill sets involved, and be able to kind of scale up what we're doing to a certain degree, and just make it more effective and more able to pursue kudzu as an economic set of yields, and as an organized research process. And that's the kind of thing that we're hoping to do, but it takes people, So that's what we're doing.
One of the things that I've always dreamed about and thought about is, we have this paper plant here in Jackson County that burns wood chips and uses recycled paper to produce this unbleached paper product.
Right.
And right adjacent to that paper plant, all along Scotts Creek, is the biggest field of kudzu on the East Coast, probably. Continuous all from here.
It's big.
From our property, which is maybe the beginning of it, all the way to up to Balsam Mountain, I think, is one continuous field of kudzu along the bank.
Yeah, it's a lot of kudzu.
And couldn't that be used as a paper stock?
Right.
There's just so many potentials there.
Yeah.
To deal with, and I think developing it into getting beyond the primitive processes which we've been using to process the root and the vine. I think we need to think about how it could be more practical in an ultimate economy we would like to see.
Well, it might take drone harvesting, because the main issue with the industrial scale is that so many kudzu patches are on steep slopes.
Right.
Especially in Western North Carolina.
Especially in Western North Carolina, that's true. Yeah, maybe in the farther south where it's flatter, but to harvest kudzu on steep slopes is inherently a handwork process, and I think that's the limiting factor. Is you can't get a tractor-based implement up on a steep slope to harvest kudzu vines.
So we have to invent some kind of a ground drone that would do that for us, basically, which it seems feasible.
I was being facetious, but yeah.
I mean, I could envision, how they have these rolling irrigation systems.
That roll out drip lines, you mean?
Yeah.
Or they have the sprinklers.
They have the sprinklers, and they're on wheels, and they just slowly move along the field.
Yeah.
You could maybe design something that would harvest the kudzu, and you could probably harvest it every 2 weeks. In the summertime, it grows about a foot a day, and that's not an exaggeration. The vines do, So you could just have this thing that combs the land and drags it down from the top to the bottom,
Yeah. Yeah.
And then starts the process over again in 2 weeks.
Yeah. So I think that with the new EPA, we can just get them to divert climate change funding to that.
There you go.
Just sitting around for good ideas, for sure.
Right, they're sitting around with billions of dollars. I hear the military is wanting to look into some good regenerative strategies instead of building new bombers. So we'll...
Yeah, we could have stealth kudzu harvest.
Right, in the middle of the night.
Use military technology,
Right.
Yeah, kudzu is one of the last places to hide from the satellite surveillance state. So you got the kudzu patch, can't find you in there.
Right.
I thought about that too. You could sort of build a semi-underground hut with a dome over it, and just let the kudzu grow over it.
No one would ever know you were there.
No one ever know you would die, and nobody would find you.
Well, that's what growing up on our land, that was so fun. I used to have these tunnel forts that I would make in the kudzu, because it gets so deep in the summer that I could get in there with a machete or a stick and open up tunnels that I could walk fully upright in as a kid without being detected from the outside.
Really?
Yeah, you didn't know about this?
See, I didn't know about that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, there's all kinds of things about kudzu I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Think of all the jokes that would come out of it.
Yeah, well, we had this part of kudzu camp each year is kudzu open mic night. When we have poetry, story, mythologies, interpretive dance, all
Freestyle rapping.
Yeah, freestyle rapping, whale games, all
whale game?
all inspired by the kudzu. You have to come to learn about the whale games. It's a special kudzu camp exclusive offer. It turns out there's an ancient mythological kinship between whales and kudzu roots.
No doubt.
Yeah.
We don't know.
Yeah, right. We were talking last night about wondering where whales came from.
Well, we know they came from the land because there's vestigial leg bones in all whales and dolphins.
Right.
So sometime or other there was an advanced civilization of land whales.
And they were farming kudzu, is what we're imagining.
Right.
Yeah.
Probably. Who
else would they be doing?
Which would explain why the kudzu roots are so large, because they had to feed whales.
Yeah.
Right, they were developed as a food source. You know?
Oh, it's all coming together.
500-pound kudzu root would be like a carrot for a whale.
Yum.
So anyway, that's the kind of thing that we're figuring out at kudzu camp.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a lot of rigorous science.
The mythologies. We're building mythologies about kudzu at these things. So yeah, so you should consider coming to kudzu camp. Again, March
16, 17, 18.
16th, 17th, and 18th.
That's a Friday through a Sunday.
Right.
And we'll probably have a couple of work exchange positions also for people to come help set up and break down a day early and a day late. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's opportunities for people who are interested in all kinds of agriculture, opportunities for artists and musicians,
Whales.
and whales and whale enthusiasts,
Yes,
and
yes.
whale theorists.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so what else? And let's talk a little bit. We really haven't talked about how kudzu fits into the general concept of permaculture, and the whole idea of just using what's around and what grows naturally to sustain ourselves.
Well, I mean, the way that we got into all this really, well, first of all, was you having the book of kudzu around and constantly experimenting with kudzu while I was growing up, and thinking of it as a resource, just like you said. And yeah, I think that is a permaculture theme, is to recognize that there is no such thing as waste. Waste is a verb rather than a noun. Waste is what we make of things and our inability to recognize the usefulness in something. It's not that there is anything on the earth that is inherently not useful. And so I think that was an attitude that you modeled as I was growing up. And then Justin and I were working together in Asheville in 2000. Would that be 10? And there was I had this permaculture design client, Michelle Smith. Shout out to Michelle Smith, who lives over on Choctaw Avenue in South French Broad, in just on the south slope of Asheville. And she had this patch of kudzu that we had done a permaculture design for her property, and we had this whole layout of fruit trees and grapevines and ducks and mushrooms and everything that were going to be in the area that was currently covered by a kudzu patch, approximately 30-year-old kudzu patch. And so she was like, how am I going to ever get rid of this kudzu to implement this permaculture plan? And so we ended up realizing, well, one day I think what happened is I was rooting around digging up a burdock root in her yard, and I dug up burdock that was growing close to a kudzu root, and there was this dark soil around that area, this dark organic matter rich soil. Then I went over 4 feet away and dug up another burdock root that was not growing next to kudzu, and the soil was red clay without all that dark organic matter.
Wow.
And I had an epiphany moment, because I had known that kudzu was a nitrogen fixing plant. Like all of the nitrogen fixers, they pull nitrogen from the air with the help of bacteria and put that nitrogen in the soil where they use it, and other organisms can use it in the soil. But I hadn't seen this physically, and so I saw the evidence visually of how the kudzu was affecting and improving the soil and creating this loamy, dark soil deep into the soil profile. And I said, whoa, this is really beautiful soil. And I was at the same time looking for a place to grow milpa, this type of agriculture from Native Americans that includes corn, beans, and squash and other plants. I was looking for a place in Asheville to grow it. So I said to Michelle, hey, Michelle, can we dig up all these kudzu roots for you and grow milpa here? And that was a win-win proposal, especially because I was working with apprentices, including Justin, so we had work to get the kudzu roots dug out. And so they proceeded to work throughout the winter digging kudzu roots up. and doing our first attempt at processing them for starch. I think we got about a tablespoon of starch, which I still have.
Oh, really?
Yeah, as a relic. We'll put it in the Kudzu Museum, the Kudzu University Museum, embalmed in kudzu wax to preserve it, and and we did. So we also learned in that process that to kill kudzu roots, by the way, you don't have to dig a kudzu root out all the way. You simply have to cut below the crown, which is just usually within a few inches of the surface. The crown is where the root transitions to the vine. It's a certain type of tissue. If you cut below that, it's like cutting the head off the kudzu plant, and the whole kudzu root will die and rot in the ground.
Okay,
so if people are trying to eradicate kudzu, which we recommend you learn how to use kudzu rather than eradicate it. But if you are trying to eradicate it, you can kill it by cutting the crowns off. And we dug all that kudzu out and eradicated it and grew milpa there for years. And so that was a system we actually kind of saw how, in that case anyway, we utilized the nitrogen fixation and soil improvement that the kudzu had been doing for 30 years or so. We utilized that in the next stage of ecological succession to grow the milpa crops in that are now going towards growing perennial plants and ultimately woody plants and a food forest in that area. So that was part of, kudzu was part of this kind of grand
that was how many years
ecological
ago?
cycle.
That was like 5 years ago?
That was 2010.
7 years ago.
Yeah.
So how's that doing? Has the kudzu gone from there?
Yeah. Kudzu's gone.
Yeah, it came back a little bit that next year, but we were
Just
It's been
involved in managing
missed
it.
or whatever,
Yeah.
right, in the digging, yeah.
And so very easy to
And
just
so
kind of
it's entirely gone now, and the milpa's there instead.
yeah, there may have been some on the neighboring property up above that are still hanging down, but yeah.
It's now being managed by someone else. It's not milpa anymore. It's now they're starting to plant woody plants there, fruit trees, and they have Jerusalem artichokes and some other things
So
there.
that's a very successful project.
Yeah. And I mean, but in my opinion, you wouldn't frequently want to dig up a kudzu patch, although in some cases you do, and Justin started a business based on that premise. You want to talk about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, a lot of people think that they need to get rid of their kudzu and are going to spray it anyway to get rid of it. And so I started a business called the Kudzu Cowboy. Where I was
KK.
what was it? No.
not Cowboy with a C.
Cowboy with a C.
Okay.
And
There's so many opportunities
it?
to practice self-control around it.
no, I had a good tagline. It was
Wrangling those.
Yeah, I'll wrangle your tangle and get your vines in line.
Wasn't there something about zoo, about zeal for zoo, or
Seal for the zoo. I don't
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
There's been some, yeah. And the idea was that I would remove the kudzu for people who wanted to remove, and in the process also find products that I could use or sell to someone else. So there's a basket maker in town,
all right,
in Asheville, called Matt Tommy, and he makes these really fine sculptural baskets out of kudzu and grapevine and wisteria. He was for a short time buying some vines from me, so I would harvest the vines from the site that I was removing them from, coil them up neatly, deliver them to Matt, and get paid for that, and then also get paid for removing the kudzu. And in just this way that Zeb's talking about, where you just kind of like find where the vines are, and with a sharp spade just kind of like cut them below where the crown is, and then they rot in place, and it's pretty easy, to do. It's a lot more labor intensive than just spraying, but it's quite a bit more effective, and like you're saying, a lot less toxic.
Yeah.
So I did that for a short time, but not. I didn't pursue it hotly.
Would you be open to more clients if anyone watching this wants you to wrangle their tangle?
I'd be open to consulting people on how to manage their kudzu, but I'm not getting into any kudzu patches at this point.
It's
a little busy.
But maybe in a sense, like the lesson from it about kudzu culture is that we would develop enough of a collective consciousness about the usefulness of kudzu and its place in an evolving climate change ecosystem and human uses, that people would know what to do with their kudzu patch, and there would be, you'd be able to get advice from people on how to manage your kudzu patch, like people get advice on how to grow your carrots or prune your apple trees. And,
Agricultural Extension Agency.
Yeah, and they give you a pamphlet produced by the Kudzu Culture Cooperative on how to manage your kudzu polyculture system.
It's all a matter of fact. Once kudzu gains value, once anything gains value, first of all, it starts to become extinct.
Exactly.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's going to have to become scarce before it gains value.
well, no, I think in this case it could lead to its becoming scarce because once it
or at
becomes
least
value,
in control.
Just like ginseng used to be so prolific, throughout the Appalachian region. People start hunting it and start harvesting it.
Yeah.
And then you have kudzu poachers.
Yeah, I mean, one distinction is that kudzu is very labor intensive to harvest and process to a usable point. So that does, unlike ginseng, which you can pop out of the ground in a trench.
That's true. It's theft resistant.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It is actually. Right, someone would have to really get in there at night with a headlamp to steal your kudzu patch.
Of course, in a Mad Max world, we might have kudzu gangs roving.
I can imagine that. I think that's worth doing a short mockumentary about. That would be another project at the Kudzu Co-op. We could do that at Kudzu Camp.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So if we get to that point, we've won.
Yeah, right. We're doing all right.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'll say at your land, it hasn't gotten to the point where the kudzu is scarce. But it's gotten to the point where I can imagine us wanting to be easy on your kudzu patch because we are harvesting 200 to 300 pounds of roots a year, and we're going to be trying to harvest more this year.
Yeah.
And after we get the patch under management and start to, because it's the large roots that are wanted for starch processing, then it starts to. I mean, they take it 50 or 70 years or more to get to harvestable size for starch production. That's a long, slow-growing plant, and it is valuable, and so it will be a coveted resource, I think.
And this kind of touches on the real estate aspect of kudzu. You should this is a good way to turn a quick profit on real estate. If you go to a piece of property, if you see a piece of property that you like, it's covered in kudzu, you can probably get it really cheap on the market right now. Which is the story of how we, when we came to Jackson County, we had virtually no money. We were just poor hippies living in a school bus.
Right.
And we saw this piece of property, and the house this is a 100-year-old farmhouse that was dilapidated, falling out. There were snakes and wasps building nests on the inside of the house and everything, and
house they grew up in.
and we got this piece of property. We got about 3 acres of kudzu covered property for about $12,000, including the house.
Yeah.
And so if you're starting out and you're wondering how in this economy you're going to survive the housing, cost of housing, you might consider looking for kudzu.
It'd be the kudzu class.
Yeah,
right.
the subclass, kudzu culture, and then slowly becoming a kudzu entrepreneur and becoming very wealthy.
Yeah, kudzu tycoon.
And kudzu tycoon.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Got kudzu, but I ain't got money. I'm so in love with you, honey. Yeah, but there need to be more country songs. Kudzu country.
Yeah.
Songs.
Yeah. With a C.
Yeah, with a C. So you see how this is. Kudzu is also a mind-altering plant that changes your sense of humor. Once you start to eat kudzu,
right.
Your sense of humor becomes irretrievable.
Yeah. One other story I have, you got to be careful when you're clearing the land.
Oh yeah.
Of kudzu, like if you're clearing one, you don't want to kill all the kudzu because it's so valuable. But if you want to clear space for a garden, on this property you've just bought for a very inexpensive price.
Right.
The process we went through is we actually went through with machetes and cleared the green part off, and then dug up the roots, and then we built. We on different parts of the land we built like bonfires to burn all this brush that we had accumulated to clear the land. And on one of these piles, we started to burn it, and a shot rang out from the middle of the fire. There was a shotgun shell, not a shotgun, but a rifle charge, apparently, that somebody had buried along.
Well, no, probably they had been shooting. Oh no, that wouldn't have worked.
Shooting groundhogs,
but then it would have been dead already. The charge, because people poach groundhogs on our land. Yeah. I think hasn't that happened in the past that people have poached groundhogs? I thought we saw some guys shooting groundhogs.
There were people that were shooting groundhogs on the land.
They know how valuable groundhogs are.
I think they were just doing target practice. I don't think that they were actually hunting.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we have a bumper crop. We have a whole civilization of groundhogs living on our land.
Right.
I mean, and they pockmark the hillside.
I think they're helping. They're getting air and water down in there, and
big
fertility,
cannonball-sized holes, that they dig.
Yeah. And they do cannonball exercises too, like in the circus with that.
You can see them out there doing Tai Chi in the morning.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, so definitely if you enjoy groundhog meat and gloves and caps.
Banjo heads, that's traditional banjo head is a groundhog skin.
Is that true?
That Elliot says.
Shoelaces?
And shoelaces, and I made a pair of groundhog skin shoelaces once.
You did?
But then rats ate them 2 weeks later.
Rats ate them?
Yes, out of my shoes.
Oh.
So apparently,
alcoholic rats.
Yeah, well, they probably were alcoholic rats.
Yeah.
Yeah, no regard.
Alcoholic rats.
Well, they were in Barnardsville. I'm not sure if the Jackson County alcoholic rat population has expanded yet.
But they were not, obviously rats not living on a kudzu patch.
Right.
Otherwise they would have cured
exactly.
alcohol.
Yeah, they don't have enough kudzu in Barnardsville.
Yeah.
Right. So
do they? Is Barnardsville a kudzu deficient?
I think it is. I don't know of any kudzu patches in Barnardsville.
There's one little one.
Okay.
Yeah. I know along the road they're going out to where Firefly Gathering is. I stopped and gathered some once, and I was teaching a little thing on kudzu at Firefly.
Oh yeah.
But not enough.
Not enough.
Well, do we have any important things to add to this? We're almost out of time here.
Let's see.
I guess the things we just want to reiterate is that we're selling roots if you're an herbalist or just curious and want to get your hands on some. You can order them now through really up until that middle of March.
Yeah.
When we'll be digging.
We'll be digging and shipping them fresh during kudzu camp.
Yeah. Or we might have a local pickup too if you're local. But shipping them fresh. And then kudzu camp is on 16th of March through the 18th. And then that's kudzu root camp, and then kudzu vine camp will be sometime this summer. Usually it's late summer, August. Yeah. So we haven't picked a date yet, but.
And again, how can people contact us or contact you to?
Kudzuculture.net is the website, and the email is kudzuculture@gmail.com.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both for joining me on News from the Roots.
The news from the kudzu roots.
Appropriate program for today.
Okay.
And
you're welcome. Thanks for having us.
We'll have you back again to talk more about what's happening at kudzu camp and in kudzu culture.
Sounds great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.